Joining us right now, Ambassador John Bolton. By the way, Ambassador Bolton, you're welcome to join us at the diner tomorrow,
That's
too.
right.
You don't seem like a pancakes guy.
I'll buy breakfast.
I think it's more of a...
I'd love to. I'll be down in Virginia Beach, but have a good time.
Oh, you got to go to Zoe's restaurant. It's my favorite restaurant down there. Check it out, Ambassador Bolton. Listen, let's talk about what happened yesterday in Ottawa, Canada's capital. A stunning development where a man, a lone gunman with a shotgun, tragically kills a soldier guarding their war memorial and then storms straight into the Parliament building and opens fire in that building. Obviously, it was an act of terror. We're now finding that there are reports that there are some indications that he recently converted to Islam and was radicalized. The president seems to be referring to this sort of like a lone wolf situation, but does there need to be a direct connection to ISIS or Al-Qaeda for us to actually look at this as terrorism and something that we need to do something about?
Well, certainly it's an act of terrorism. I think, obviously, with the information still fragmentary, we can't draw conclusions about the big picture, although certainly the evidence points in the direction of this being an Islamicist terrorist attack, as there was in Canada just a few days before it against two other soldiers. And, this paralysis of not being able to speak what is evident to our own eyes, I think has a truly negative effect on our ability to deal with the problem. If you can't talk about it, if you can't describe it, if you can't explain it, how are you supposed to be able to act effectively against it? And I think that feeds into this endless discussion. Is this terrorist attack a lone wolf attack? Is that terrorist attack? As if it's unconnected with what's at the bottom of all of them, which is this ideology of radical Islam. We're not talking about religious beliefs here. We're not talking about people carrying out their faith in their God as they see him. We're talking about a political ideology about how to run the world and how to achieve that through acts of terrorism. So I think it's entirely consistent to say that lone wolf attacks are directly connected to the ideology. In a world where communication over the internet, no longer requires, as it did in the 30s and 40s in this country, cell meetings of the Communist Party. You don't need to sit around in somebody's living room. You can get it off your computer screen.
And that's exactly my next question. You led up to that perfectly. I'm concerned that people are being radicalized via the internet. We just saw this case in America where a 15, 16, 17-year-old girl got convinced through things they read on the internet and conversations they were having to go over and fight the war with ISIS. What should we do? I mean, I'm very sensitive to the First Amendment concerns here, but what should we do to make sure that the internet is not used to radicalize people inside this country?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is wake up to the reality of what we're facing, that it's not a person with mental problems who reads something on the internet and goes off the deep edge. These girls from Denver you're referring to made it all the way to Frankfurt and were barely caught in time because their parents had reported them absent. We saw this in the London transportation bombings in 2005 in the subway and bus attacks. We saw it a few years ago in London when drummer Rigby was killed in a knife attack on the streets of London. This ideology that we're talking about can only be combated if you can bring it out in the open and discuss it. And if people are too intimidated by the thought police to be able to talk about facts that are evident, we're going to be in trouble. And what's most remarkable about the London bombings, about the Boston Marathon bombings, about Major Haddad at Fort Hood, apparently what's been happening in Canada and a range of others, these are not like the 9/11 terrorists brought in from the Middle East where they were already radicalized. These are people who have grown up in free societies. They have had all the benefit of freedom, and they've still turned into radical Islamicists. That, to me, is the most frightening thing, that you can reject the prospect of freedom for this ideology, and unless we're prepared to accept that it can happen, we will not deal with it effectively.
Well, let's be specific here, because you're talking about basically saying that in some of our policies right now we're putting political correctness and sensitivities in front of a sound policy that's going to keep America safe. Is that what the President and Secretary of State John Kerry are bending to political correctness?
That's what Barack Obama has done for 6 years. If you take out all of his speeches and lay them next to each other, you'll find that the war on terror is over. Al-Qaeda is on the run. There's no no threat. Osama bin Laden is dead. This is a law enforcement problem. It's not a war. You can't forget 6 years of speeches. He does not believe in the war on terrorism. But I tell you, if they can attack in Ottawa, they can attack in any city in America. And I think ISIS has taken al-Qaeda-style terrorism to a whole new level, tragically, and we haven't seen anything like the end of it yet. All the while, ISIS is consolidating its control over a huge swath of territory in what used to be Syria and Iraq, and we are responding with minimal force focused on one city where reporters can happen to see the battle from across the Turkish border. We are allowing ISIS to create a new state that will be a magnet for terrorists, and what we just saw in Ottawa, I think, is only the beginning.
All right, so a lot of people say you really can't get at ISIS unless you get boots on the ground. We're doing an air campaign. Is it having the effect we intended?
No, it's clearly not. And, people say, but we don't want boots on the ground. I'm telling you, there are boots on the ground in Ottawa, Canada yesterday. Yeah. They weren't our boots, and they'll be on the ground in this country. So what's your preference? Fight them here in the streets of America? Or fight them over there.
Yeah, I'm hard to argue with that.
When you talk about boots on the ground, though, Ambassador Bolton, there are some boots there that actually are making a difference. The Kurds. Are we doing enough to support the Kurds in their efforts who are actually willing to fight the fight? And if we aren't doing enough, why aren't we doing enough?
Well, we're not doing nearly enough. Now, I don't think we should overestimate the Kurds. I think they'll fight to defend their territory, and that's very important. We should arm them directly, but we're not. The Obama administration is sending whatever aid is supposed to go to the Kurds militarily through the government in Baghdad. And my guess is most of it's never arriving in Kurdistan. And that's because the administration is still obsessed with the notion of cutting a deal on Iran's nuclear weapons program. And it doesn't want to offend Iran by offending its puppet government in Baghdad or by offending what's left of the Assad regime in Syria. And I have to say, despite this attack in Ottawa yesterday, the biggest threat we face is the surrender that the administration is about to agree to on the Iranian nuclear weapons program. I don't know whether it'll be before the election. Maybe that's the October surprise. Maybe it will come after the election. But that deal with Iran, from everything we've been able to see, is going to be gravely dangerous for the United States and its allies.
All right. Well, listen, Ambassador John Bolton, on that ominous note, we'll have to leave it there. Yeah. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for having me.